Hi there, Rebecca Mills here with Utah State University Extension to share some wellness wisdom to help you meet your health goals. Today we're going to tackle a topic that will be sure to enhance your experience with food. We're going to learn about herbs and spices. We'll cover things like what are herbs and spices, the pros and cons of buying them versus growing them, as well as some cooking tips and health benefits. So let's get to it. There's a lot of great history surrounding herbs and spices. People have been using them for centuries to preserve food or make food taste better. At one time, only the wealthy could afford spices, and there was a large international trade market for them between Europe and the Middle East. There's some speculation that the discovery of America was an accident, that the spice explorers were really just trying to find a faster route from Asia to Spain. Can you imagine their disappointment or the conversation between that boat captain and the navigator? Dude, what's this whole continent doing here? I thought you said Spain was this direction. Kind of funny. So what exactly are herbs and spices? An herb is typically a low-growing plant, and the part we use is often the fresh or dried leaves because of their culinary, cosmetic, medicinal, or aromatic qualities. Basically, they're pretty and they smell and taste really good. Depending on the herb, it could be an annual, biennial, or perennial plant. Some examples of herbs are basil, oregano, thyme, and rosemary. As for spices, they are more aromatic or fragrant than herbs and have a pungent or strong taste. Unlike the herbs, spices more often come from the flowers, fruit, seeds, root, or bark of the plant and not the leaves. Some examples of spices would be cinnamon, which comes from bark, ginger, which comes from the root, black pepper, which comes from a berry, nutmeg, which comes from seeds, and cloves, which comes from the bud. Even though they are different botanically, you might hear the words used interchangeably or simply substituted with the word seasoning. Alright, let's talk about where you can get herbs and spices and some things to consider. Think with me for a moment. Say you've decided to use more spices in your cooking, so you go to the spice aisle at the grocery store. Think of what you might see there. Rows and rows of little bottles, big bottles, powders, dried leaves, whole crunchy looking things, pre-blended seasonings, and some prices that might make your eyes bulge. Of course, when you compare the price to the size of the container, you might be getting a better deal by buying a larger bottle, and usually that's what I would recommend. It's just a good consumer decision to check price per ounce and buy the best price. When it comes to spices though, you'll want to consider how long it's going to take you to use that bottle. The flavor and potency of the spice deteriorates over time. I remember McCormick Spices coming out with a media campaign recently that said something about encouraging people to throw out the spices they had in their cupboards that were still in the old tin canisters, because if you'd had the spice that long, it really wasn't worth its weight in spice, since the company stopped selling tin spice containers like 15 or 20 years ago. Also, I recognize that throwing things out sounds morally wrong, so in the case of spices, consider how much you'll use that spice before you stock up in 10-pound bags of it. Just like most shelf-stable foods, there are things you can do to extend the life of the spice. In general, you'll want to keep spices away from moisture, heat, and sunlight. You can keep spices away from moisture by making sure you measure using clean, dry spoons and keep them stored in airtight containers. As for the heat and sunlight, do you have one of those handy spice racks on the counter or right above the stove where it could get hot and catch the steam off of that pan of boiling water? Also, is there a window nearby? Quite possibly. It's pretty handy to keep spices next to the stove because you need them when you're cooking, right? That's all true, but we may also be decreasing the quality and flavor of our spices by storing them there. In a fact sheet from West Virginia State University Extension Service titled Herbs and Spices, they recommend keeping whole spices 2 to 5 years, ground spices 6 months to 2 years, leafy herbs from 3 months to 2 years, and dehydrated vegetables for 6 months. One way to extend the life even a little bit more would be to store your spices and herbs in the freezer. You can also test the freshness of your herbs and spices by crushing a small amount in your hand and seeing if there's any aroma. If you can't smell it, you won't be able to taste it either. In general, the difference between ground herbs and spices and whole herbs and spices is that the whole herbs and spices retain flavor much longer than the ground ones do. You'll get a fresher flavor by grounding the spice right before you want to use it as well. As for growing your own, spices are most often found on tropical plants and trees. But many varieties of herbs can be grown in the United States either indoors or outdoors. Because herbs grow in small bush-like plants, they really don't need a lot of space either. After clipping the stems, you can gather a bunch together, bind with a rubber band, and then hang them upside down in a hot, dark, dry place until the leaves are crisp and dry. Another method would be to use a dehydrator or to lay the leaves out flat on a newspaper. After they are dry, store the leaves in an airtight container or in the freezer. Or you could just use them fresh. Alright, so you've decided to use spices and herbs, you've decided whether to buy them or grow them, and now the question is, what am I going to do with them? Well, not to worry. There's so much you can do, and I have some great info to share with you about changing up the flavors of your meals with different spices and herbs or seasoning blends. This is a great list of how you can change a meal to different ethnic flavors just by altering the spices used. One tip I would also give is if you're experimenting with adding spices or herbs to your food, start with just a little bit at a time. You can always add more if you want a stronger flavor, but it is really difficult to compensate for the overpowering flavor of using too much of a spice or herb. This list comes from our Utah State University Extension Food Sense curriculum called Create. That curriculum teaches how if you have a well-stocked pantry, you can create all kinds of great meals from casseroles to soups, salads, omelets, stir-fry, and much more. Check out that great info at extension.usu.edu/foodsense. This list is one I compiled from a couple different fact sheets, one from the University of Missouri Extension and the other from Kansas State University Extension. Links to both and all of the other fact sheets I used in preparing this video are available in the video description below. I really like this list because it shows the variety of things you can add herbs and spices to, and what kinds of flavors might mix well together. As you can see, some herbs or spices can be used on many different things, so you might use up that little bottle faster than expected. Another great thing about this is, say you have a picky eater in your family. I think it might be a fun experiment for kids or adults to see if adding a different herb or spice makes the food any more palatable. Again, start small, otherwise you'll waste spices and food, but I encourage you to experiment and see how it goes. I'd love to read your comments below about your favorite way to spice up your mealtime. The last topic I want to cover is the health benefits of incorporating herbs and spices into your diet. First off is the opportunity to reduce your sugar intake. By adding things like allspice, which is a blend of cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, or some of the other spices listed here, you might find that you don't have to have as much sugar. One caution is that in some baking recipes, sugar plays a part in the browning, tenderness, or leavening of the finished product. So if you take out too much of the sugar, your end product might be a little different. So just experiment with gradual changes. Another health benefit is the opportunity to cut out some salt by adding herbs and spices. I've mentioned before in some of my other Wellness Wisdom videos about how we typically consume more sodium or salt than we need to, and it can be really detrimental to our health. Part of it is the consumption of processed foods, where salt is added as a preservative. But I know I often fall into the rut of only seasoning food with salt and not trying anything else. One caution here is that even some of the pre-mixed seasoning blends have quite a bit of salt in them, so be careful there. This list of herbs and spices may just work for you in boosting the flavor of your favorite dishes in a different way than salt does. Go ahead, be creative. You might be pleasantly surprised. The third health benefit is an opportunity to reduce our fat consumption. If you're trying to cut fat out of your diet, you may have noticed that your food all of a sudden tastes like cardboard. It's common that when you cut fat, you also end up losing flavor. Spices and herbs to the rescue. Another thing is that instead of using a lot of breading, batters, gravies, or sauces, which often contain added fat, you can marinate with spices or simply create a dry rub for your meats or veggies. Then, of course, another way to cut out just a little bit more fat is to grill instead of fry in oil. And lastly, antioxidant power. There are a lot of things out there that talk about the natural healing benefits of herbs and spices, not all of which are proven by solid research, and some of which may even be folklore. My goal as an extension professional is to share with you things that have been proven, and some of what's out there just simply hasn't been proven. What I can tell you is that there are studies that show that herbs and spices are sources of natural antioxidants, and antioxidants play an important role in neutralizing free radicals and reducing cancer risk. Some herbs and spices even have more antioxidant power per gram than some fruits and vegetables, which is pretty cool. The flip side to that is we don't consume as much of the herb or spice as we do the fruit or vegetable, but we can know that by incorporating herbs and spices into a diet already full of fruits and vegetables only boosts that antioxidant power. This list I have here are herbs and spices with the highest antioxidant levels. Research is also showing that cinnamon can act like insulin in the body and help regulate blood sugar levels. Sage may protect brain cells and help preserve memory and thinking. Turmeric may be useful in treating Alzheimer's, cancer, and cystic fibrosis. Cloves can help ease a toothache. Rosemary may help reduce headaches or prevent damage that could lead to strokes. And ginger is often used as a natural remedy for nausea and vomiting. I'm sure they sell a lot of ginger ale on cruise ships and airplanes. You might notice I use the word may, because basically a lot of this hasn't been proven, but there is research being done on the subject, which is promising. It's always a good idea to consult your physician before basing health decisions on yet to be proven information. In summary, we learned today about the botanical differences between herbs and spices, where to get them and how to store them for maximum potency and freshness, some suggested combinations to liven up your foods, and the health benefits of spices and herbs, including the potential to reduce sugar, salt, and fat in our diets while boosting antioxidants. Thanks for joining me today as we learned about incorporating herbs and spices to make our food a little more exciting. With a little creativity, you'll be well on your way to reaching your health goals. This is Rebecca Mills with Utah State University Extension, sharing a little wellness wisdom. Now go out and make it a healthy day.